Let's start with a few big ideas and questions. The need for open communications and the truth, in quotes, are of prime importance always, but especially now. Can you talk about that generally in the sciences and specifically regarding CoVis and ReFigure?
Absolutely. I think even before the COVID pandemic occurred, my co-founder and I were very interested in bringing to light truth in scientific research. And I think that the COVID pandemic really highlights that for us. We have a situation where scientific knowledge can't be developed over decades. We need the answers now. And so I think that the truth in science, truth in the experiments that are being done, actionable data is more important than ever. And when we saw this happening, this pandemic evolve, and I think being part of the scientific community, at least myself and my co-founder, we were looking at these early virus cases as early as January, even December, and sort of, it was on our radar. And so I think that this time more than ever, science has a great impact, and we need more tools to better, validate that science and make sure that diagnostics, therapeutics, et cetera, are the best they can be.
And maybe to kind of push that idea of truth, is that science and knowledge are important aspects of what is true. And, I think some people now question if it is true or not, like they have an opinion about science. You can't really have an opinion about science, right? Isn't it sort of, it either is or it isn't?
Definitely. I think that's definitely I would say, being a member of the scientific community, I think in looking out, that's sort of the common perception of science, that, it's either yes or no, it's either up or down, it's a positive or a negative. And from my perspective, being a scientist and working, also focusing on scientific publishing with ReFigure, is that those solid yeses and nos that's what's developed over decades and years.
Exactly, and it comes from a kind of, I would say, kind of historical collaboration, right? That you're basing your research on, like, an idea that maybe came to fruition 10 years ago, and you're going to continue, and
exactly.
That truth is realized by repetition, right? By iteration.
Yes.
And that something is proven.
Right.
And I just wondered, this is just an aside, but we've talked about this before, that that in an art practice, as opposed to a scientific practice, you can stay in that kind of in-between state. You don't have to prove anything. You're just making something, sort of expressing yourself. It's parallel to what happens in science, but science has to go sort of beyond the metaphor and be provable, so that you can then create a vaccine that is actually going to help somebody.
Exactly. I think what we're seeing in the current crisis is increased demand and acceleration of the scientific process that normally takes many years, and the system's under stress. The way that we communicate scientific data, it's not on the same publishing cycle as consumer publishing. Although that is the demand. People need answers now. Lives are at stake, and so economies are at stake. So the system's under stress, and I think it's still a very valid analogy that in the art practice, once you've looked internally and done your process, and then you expose it to this dialogue with other people, other organizations, with the wider public eventually. That same process happens in science. The mechanisms and techniques and the conventions are different. But once you have a finding, you share it with your colleagues, your close colleagues, your distant colleagues, and then you release it to the world. And it's through that dialogue that the data gets refined, the questions are refined, it's an iterative process, it starts over again, and all that takes time. So what we're trying to do in ReFigure is to accelerate that, and COVID is, in some ways, the perfect opportunity to really advance things and improve. Yep.
Well, I'll say this probably a couple times. I am grateful for the work that the scientists are doing. It just seems so like imperative, and yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's really
We've discussed that, and I just like every day I just think, oh, thank God,
it's a really good point, because before COVID, et cetera, I mean, I've always worked, or for many years I've worked in cancer research. Before the COVID crisis, there wasn't as much attention paid, obviously, to infectious disease, in this country. There were different research priorities. And what we saw from a practicing science perspective was that things shifted on a dime. So for instance, Garisha, my co-founder, one day she got to work, all the Harvard labs were shutting down because that was the mandate. For safety reasons, people couldn't come into the labs anymore. It wasn't a type of job you could do remotely. You can't do biological experiments from your computer at home. So all the labs were shutting down, and the one exception that was made was if the lab was participating in COVID-related coronavirus research, it could stay open. And so her lab director, the head of the lab, came in and said, today we're a COVID lab, and that's what we're going to focus on. So the entire lab, which was previously in bioengineering, had to convert almost overnight into a whole new field of research and try to apply their technology to a new area. And what happens, and that was happening wide scale, not just at Harvard, but
Right.
across the country, across the
Yeah,
world.
and I know here locally, the Broad Institute has been a big player in the research, and they pivoted everybody to COVID.
Exactly.
No matter what.
Exactly. So what happened during that time, and what Garisha appreciated, was that people didn't really know about this area of research, right? And we wanted to create a foothold for people, a place where they could go and they could start to get that foundational knowledge and access this new area of research. And that's what CoVis came out of that motivation.
That was going to be my next question to you. How was CoVis realized?
Yeah.
So the second part of that question is, how was CoVis realized? How is it supported by imaginative ideas? And how are these ideas tested?
The imaginative ideas behind CoVis is really about, can we reimagine the way that science is communicated? Can we reimagine how people access science, interpret it, and how it's translated to all different audiences? And fortunately, we had a collaborator we had been working with for many years with the Open Knowledge Maps in Vienna, and they too have imaginative ideas about how science is displayed and communicated. So it was a natural collaboration that evolved, and through that process, I think that because of the nature of the crisis and what we were trying to do, and that our ideas were imaginative, being sort of outside of convention, that the testing happened real time. So probably starting from the end of March till now, we have been actively talking with the Open Knowledge Maps team, developing new features, trying it out, recruiting people to try it out, and then that feedback was going back into the system. So
just to clarify, I think that's marvelous that that this collaboration is happening. So is Open Knowledge Maps, are they kind of creating the back end of the website, the kind of...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the way that it's structured right now is Open Knowledge Maps has this platform that allows you to very quickly visually see how papers are grouped, scientific papers are grouped and connected. And with just a single click, the user can now get more details from the visual interface. They can see the details, the textual details. And so they're building the back end. And then Garisha and I and our team at ReFigure have been curating the knowledge that has gone into the map. And in addition to curating the papers, we are also including the visual refigures in that knowledge map.
Okay, so Joe, we've talked about the creation of CoVis, but can you be more specific and talk about how it was realized and your relationship with Open Knowledge Maps?
So from when Peter and his team at Open Knowledge Map started working with Garisha and I, and our relationship goes back, multiple years. that what was interesting was we both have a system that is primarily it's a visual system. So if you go to a ReFigure, the first thing you're going to see is the figure data. You'll see some visual representation of data that's out there in the literature. And by the same token, in the Open Knowledge Map system, you see a network of how papers are connected with very little textual detail. And it's as you drill down into it that you start to access the textual detail. So there was a certain parallelism in how ReFigure was conceived and implemented and how Open Knowledge Maps was implemented. And that was one of the things we deepened and enriched our mutual understandings of as CoVis evolved over these months, was that Open Knowledge Maps and ReFigure had a very similar philosophy about how science could be communicated and accessed. And it is visual. What we're seeing with ReFigure since when we met with you for the podcast and then for the discussion with Jason is that people who were even earlier in their training as scientists have been using ReFigure because a lot of times people can understand a graph of data. You know, when we make a figure as a scientist, it's meant to be easily interpretable. That's easier to access to a newcomer, whether you're a researcher that was working on bioengineered scaffolds, but now you have to go into a completely new field like COVID and coronavirus. Or if you're just a new trainee, maybe you've just finished your high school or college program and now you're going to explore graduate work. The figures are the primary way that people understand data. And in fact, looking at a scientific article, reading the title and the abstract and the introduction, that's really dense, heavy stuff. And we find that people want to jump to the figures and say, well, what is the data? And then they can actually understand the text better.
Right.
Because they have some, like you were saying, something has been immediately communicated or understood. And now that becomes a basis to deepen your knowledge.
We, the lay people, are also seeing a lot of data and, you know, on social media and so on. So, you know, I think maybe people are becoming more accustomed to, you know, or trying to understand, like, you know, what these graphs mean, or, you know, and I read the New York Times and, you know, almost every day there's like a map of like the United States or other countries, you know, with like, these are the hotspots and, you know, so we're all becoming sort of more accustomed to just relying on visualization, not just reading about it.
Yeah, no, we have experienced that too. And the users that we talk to, friends and family, other people that we work with in a business relationship, that people seem to be much more interested and engaged because now we walk out the door, do we wear a mask or not? There's actually studies being done to figure this out in almost every aspect of it.
What is the importance of observation for you? How does seeing, i.e. observation, actual looking, lead to insights and ideas? And this is something we've talked a lot about in terms of the visual arts, and it's parallel in science to looking and understanding.
Our platforms were developed for scientific professionals. We do look forward to, you know, where else can this be useful? But that I think there is a danger in oversimplification. There's definitely, I think today you can go into careers in data visualization and you see all, like on the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and so on and so forth, you see very sophisticated visualizations that really make data more digestible. But at the same time, I think there's a danger to that, to oversimplifying, overinterpreting. And I hope that all of these tools, all of these things that are happening cause people to engage with data more and use tools like ReFigure.
Maybe this is a slightly different subject, but I know part of your goal is to empower scientists as peer reviewers, or as you say, to review, you know, the scientific knowledge is reviewed by peers, and to try to eliminate the paywall.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the ReFigure and CoVis and Open Knowledge Maps, we're all part of a larger community, an open science community. And open science means making science more accessible, across the world. And one of the first things that you'll hear people talk about in this sort of open science realm is the need to reduce paywalls. So the way that scientific data is conventionally published in a scientific article, it will be put behind a paywall, much like you have a paywall with different consumer publishing outlets, but they're often much more expensive, and the audience is much smaller. So that is a big goal of the open science community, to reduce paywalls, to eliminate, in some cases, eliminate paywalls. And I think the scientific publishing industry has responded to that, and they've come up with different, I think it's an ongoing discussion with these interested groups like the open science community, with government organizations, because a lot of times government pays for the scientific research. Ultimately, the taxpayers pay for the scientific research, in discussion and collaboration with the publishing industry. And that's a very fluid area where there's a lot of debate ongoing. And ReFigure and CoVis are complementary to that. So we empower people to share the data that they already have access to. And what that does is it leads to more sharing of the data. And part of our idea is that ultimately more sharing, more reading, more engagement will be beneficial for everybody, publishers, other stakeholders, the open science community.
Well, that's marvelous,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
And I actually, maybe maybe a related question, which is, you mentioned that Open Knowledge Maps is in Vienna. So this is, I guess, would be considered a global, CoVis and are kind of global then, or maybe that's a question. Would you like it to be, across the world?
Absolutely, and that is part of Grija and my vision, as well as Peter and his team. We have a lot of discussion about that. Science is a global endeavor. It's a human endeavor, and we do everything we can to include scientists wherever they are. It doesn't really matter to us. And there's incredible coronavirus and COVID-related research happening around the world. And we are actively talking to scientists on other continents and countries to see if they want to contribute to CoVis. The original inception of CoVis was between the group in Vienna and us in Boston. And that's the first release of the database. But now we're in a phase where more people are getting involved. We're recruiting more curators. It's going to be a community-led project.
Yeah.
Yep. And we hope that it's a very diverse and worldwide community.
So a thought I'd like to end with is this, that it is of great comfort to me personally that we are finding our way through science, as you have described, and which is, what you want to have happen. As we've discussed across the world, scientists have pivoted to working on COVID-19 research. And this seems of utmost importance now. And so I just want to thank you for the work you're doing and for taking time with me to share your insight, knowledge, and great ideas.
Absolutely, Deborah. I appreciate the opportunity. It is a very unique time, very challenging time for everyone across the world. And my perspective on it is that, the truth will set you free, or knowledge is our best bulwark against, uncertainty, fear, and ignorance. And when like I said, Grija and I were reading these initial reports in December and January, and being trained as immunologists, that like a virus wasn't scary to us necessarily. What was happening what's interesting about COVID is that the immune system in these very severe cases almost seems like it's overreacting, and it's destroying lung tissue. The immune system is in response to the virus. So it's dysregulated in some of these cases, these severe cases. So that too, to us, was that we've seen that before in our immunological studies. We know of many instances where the immune system can do that. And having that knowledge and having that background was something that helped us not be fearful, not be uncertain, because we knew that there are generations of scientists that have contributed their life's work to the study of immunology. And so at this point, it's not a mysterious system, what's happening. And the same with viruses, and the same with all these different areas of human knowledge. So that was definitely part of the motivation behind CoVis, was to share knowledge, make it easier for others to share knowledge, and really get at what you were talking about, education, communication, so that people wouldn't be a prisoner to uncertainty and fear.